Welcome back to another episode of the Hello Sis Dorsey podcast. So, in today's episode, in keeping with the theme that of the questions that I get asked during my boot camp, what I do is I take the questions that people ask in the live Facebook chat, and I take those questions and I create podcast episodes out of them answering those questions. This is actually a really great way to repurpose content. And if you ever want to know, like, what your podcast content should be about or what should you should talk about, definitely use this strategy, especially if you do Facebook Lives and you have a group. You can pull those questions and you could create episodes out of that. But that's not what we're talking about. Today, we're going to be talking about how many episodes do you start with when you launch a podcast. Um, I recommend 4. Some people say you need to have at least 8 episodes when you launch a podcast. And that could be the case. But for me, I like to say 4 because I don't want my students or my clients getting burnt out before they even launch. Okay. 8 episodes could be a bit much. It's a heavy load. Um, People probably be like, well, Candace, you don't know what you're talking about. 8 is a great number to launch. And hey, that's awesome. That's you. But for me, I like to keep it like less stressful and I like to keep it doable for my students. So when they ask how many episodes should I start off launching with, I would say 4. 4 is a sweet number. It will help you get going. It will definitely help you get in the groove of things. And then when you get ready to launch your next 4, you can say, okay, well, I can add an extra 2 during my batching process, and I can add extra 2 when I'm recording, and then I'll have 6 episodes already recorded when I schedule those out. So it's totally up to you how you want to do it after that, but I think 4 is a great, comfortable, and low stressful way when you're launching. I love to give low stressful, low energy, so you won't have to use up so much of your time to create the episodes, to record the episodes. And if you listen to my previous episodes where I talked about how long should your podcast be, it is totally up to you. You can do 15 minutes. If you do 15 minutes for each episode, you're recording only an hour time. So you take 1 hour out of your day to record those 4 episodes, which will be the 4 episodes that you launch, or if you're batching. And that's just 1 hour out of your day, opposed to having hours out of your day. Okay. I listen to Amy Porterfield's podcast, and I'm in her List Builder Society program, as well as many of her other programs. And she does 8 episodes. She batch 8 episodes. And I don't know if I think she batch them in a day, or I think she takes 2 days to batch them. But she does 8 at a time every time she's batching. And not to mention, she's doing 2 episodes a week. So then it was 8. It's probably 12 now because she has her interview episodes generally like on Tuesdays, and then she have her shorty episodes on Thursday. I might switch that or flip that around. But she's doing 2 episodes a week. Now she can do that because she has the bandwidth and she has a team behind her. I'm little old me, you're little old you. You're the only ones doing this in this game, okay? In this podcast game. So I like to have it as low stressful as possible to where as though you can do this yourself without actually hiring someone. And then you can hire someone later on down the road when you get to the level where you're able to do so. But for me, I like to teach 4 episodes when you launch. And people ask, well, what do I talk about? So many different things that you can talk about. But in my podcast launch guide, I will link it in the show notes. There is a page where it says your first 4 episodes. Okay. And here are some tips to talk about for your first 4 episodes. So I have it laid out what you can talk about in each episode just to get the momentum going. So in your first episode, and some of my students are like, well, Candace, for the first episode, Couldn't this be a trailer? And it can be. It definitely can be. So for the first episode, you can talk about what the podcast is going to be about. You give highlights of what your listeners can expect in the upcoming episodes. You'll talk about how many episodes you're going to be delivering. Is it going to be one episode weekly, two episodes a week, or how often you're going to be publishing? You could talk about that. You could do that in the trailer as well. So that could be like your trailer episode 1. And then episode 2, you would talk about you, who you are, your quirks about you, family, fur babies, anything. You kind of like getting people to get to know you. Definitely tell them, who you are, why you're qualified to do what you're doing, any background stories, anything like that. Don't get into too deep. But you want to talk about why you're qualified for teaching the topic or talking about the subject in your podcast, okay? Then episode 3 is time to get into the content. Here's where you kick off the content and you give listeners small portions so they can come back for more. And then episode 4, you continue delivering the rest of the content. You maybe want to add a guest expert to come in, anything like that. Now, here's the thing. If you've had previous content where you did some sort of uh presentation where you were on a stage, or if you've done some sort of training like a Facebook Live or anything like that, or if you was on a previous podcast and the host gave you permission to utilize that content to put on your podcast, you can actually bake in that content in with your first couple of episodes. Okay? I know. Genius, right? You can actually do that. So if you're like, well, I don't have time to record, but I have this content that I can repurpose, you could definitely do so. I would say in the beginning, introduce what the content is. So, like, for example, if you did a Facebook Live, I would do like a little short recording, kind of like explaining what this episode is about and where you're at, just so they won't be like, is she outside? Or, kind of like, is this an event or what is this? In the beginning of the episode, just kind of explain, hey, in this episode, I did a Facebook Live and I wanted to share with you guys. And we talked about XYZ, break it down, summary, kind of like a summarization, and then say, okay, we're getting ready to go into the episode. Here you go into the Facebook Live, and then you present it in the audio form. So there's so many different ways you can do this, but your first 4 episodes, great kickoff, great way to launch your podcast. I've had people do it. Some people did it their own way, which is perfectly fine, but it's in the podcast launch guide and I will link it up in the show notes. Okay. So I hope this episode was helpful. And like I stated, if you are a coach, course creator, service provider, launching a podcast will be an excellent way for you to build the momentum, generate leads, generate business for your service provider business. It will be a great way for you to get listeners, amplify your message, whatever your goal is. Podcasting is a great way to do that. So, like I said before, I have a podcast launch guide that will help you set the tone and foundation for your podcast. The link is in the show notes. I hope this was helpful, and we will continue on with questions that I get in my boot camps. So stay tuned, and I will talk to you on the next episode.